Your son is dying, I said, and I'm the surgeon on call. My father stared at the badge clipped to my white coat. Dr. Brina Hale. For 6 years, Daniel Hale had refused to say my name unless it was attached to shame. Now he was standing in a hospital consult room, his oldest son bleeding internally somewhere beyond the double doors, while the daughter he believed had been expelled from medical school stood between Marcus and a body bag. Mom whispered, "No, there must be another doctor." Dad grabbed her hand so hard her face tightened. "Who allowed her in here?" he demanded. The nurse beside me went still. The attending coordinator stepped forward and said, "Dr. Hale is the only cardiothoracic surgeon available tonight who can perform this repair." Dad's jaw flexed. "She's not a doctor." I looked past him to the gurney in the hall. Marcus was awake enough to hear us. And when his eyes met mine, he turned his face to the wall. Not like a brother afraid of dying. Like a man afraid I had finally come back with proof. The monitor above Marcus's bed screamed in quick, uneven beats as the surgical team moved around him. A nurse pressed gauze against the IV site. Another adjusted the oxygen mask slipping down his face. Marcus's skin had gone the color of wet paper. "Acute aortic dissection," I said, keeping my voice even. "The tear is extending. He needs surgery now." Mom's lips trembled. "Brina." The way she said it almost sounded like she remembered I was her daughter. Dad stepped in front of her. "Get someone else." "There isn't someone else," the coordinator said. "Not within the window he has." Dad looked at me like I was still 24, standing on their porch with a stack of unopened letters, begging them to check with the school before believing Marcus. Back then, Dad had told me I had embarrassed the family. He had said doctors needed integrity, and I had proven I had none. Now his son's life depended on the integrity he thought I never had. A nurse held out the consent form. "Mr. Hale, we need a decision." Dad didn't take the pen. Mom looked from Marcus to me, tears already spilling, but no apology came. Just fear. Fear for the son they kept. Fear of the daughter they threw away. Fear of needing the person they had punished. I signed the surgical board and reached for my mask. "I'll treat him because I took an oath," I said, "not because any of you deserve it." I turned toward the operating room. Then Marcus's fingers closed around my sleeve. Weak, shaking, desperate. "Brina," he rasped through the oxygen mask. I leaned closer. His eyes flicked toward our parents. "Don't tell them." My hand went cold inside my glove. Because I hadn't said a word about the lie yet. What did Marcus think I knew? The second Marcus said, "Don't tell them," the hallway noise seemed to drop away. I had heard patients beg before. I had heard husbands ask me not to tell wives how bad the scans were. I had heard children whisper for their mother's right before anesthesia took them under. But Marcus wasn't begging for his life. He was begging for silence. "Prep him," I told the nurse. Marcus's fingers tightened on my sleeve. "Brina, please." I looked down at him. "Please what?" His eyes darted toward the glass window where Mom and Dad stood frozen, watching us like I had walked in wearing a stolen coat. "They can't handle more stress," Marcus whispered. "Not tonight." That was Marcus. Even half-conscious, even with his chest splitting open from the inside, he still knew how to make himself sound like the reasonable one. "Funny," I said quietly. "You weren't worried about their stress when they cut me off." His lips moved under the oxygen mask. "You made choices." "What choices?" He swallowed and the monitor kicked faster. "You know what I meaned." No, I didn't, not at first. 6 years ago, I was in my 3rd year of medical school when Dad stopped answering my calls. Mom sent back my birthday card unopened. Then Marcus texted me 5 words that rearranged my entire life. "You should have told them before the school did." I called him 17 times. He never picked up. 3 weeks later, I drove 4 hours to my parents' house with my residency acceptance letter folded in my purse like it was evidence in a trial. I found new locks on the front door. Dad spoke through the wood. "Doctors have integrity," he said. "You proved you don't." "Dad, please open the door," I begged. "Just call the dean, call anyone." Mom cried behind him, close enough that I could hear her breath break. But she didn't open the door. Marcus stood at the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, phone in his hand. He didn't look surprised. He looked like someone waiting for a meeting to end. Now, in the pre-op bay, I heard his voice again. "Don't make this about the past," he whispered. I leaned closer. "Then tell me why you know the exact phrase Dad used." His eyelids flickered. "Falsifying patient records," I said. "That's what he accused me of. I never told you that." Marcus stared at the ceiling. "That was never real," I said. "There was no hearing, no expulsion, no patient record scandal, so what exactly did you show them?" His monitor spiked hard. Through the window, Dad grabbed Mom's shoulder as alarms began chirping faster. A nurse stepped between us. "Dr. Hale, pressure's dropping, we have to move." Marcus's eyes found mine one last time. For the first time in my life, my brother looked smaller than me. I pulled my sleeve from his grip. "Take him in now." The surgery lasted 5 hours. When I finally stepped into the family waiting area, my scrubs were still marked at the cuffs, my hair was flattened under the cap, and my hands felt like they still remembered the shape of Marcus's torn aorta. Mom stood first. Dad stood faster. Before I could give the update, he said loudly, "Did you enjoy this?" Every face in the room turned. A nurse at the desk looked up. A hospital administrator paused near the coffee machine. 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years sat rigid against the wall. I kept my voice low. "Marcus survived, he's in ICU, he's sedated, and the next 24 hours matter." Dad took 1 step toward me. "You expect us to thank you for using my son's emergency to force your way back into this family?" Mom whispered, "Daniel." "No," he snapped. "She doesn't get to walk in here wearing a costume after what she did." The administrator approached. "Sir, lower your voice." Dad pointed at my badge. "She was expelled from medical school. She falsified patient records. She ruined our name, and now she wants applause." The words hit the waiting room like dropped glass. One of my cousins stared at me, then at my white coat folded over my arm. "But I saw an article about Brina last year," she said carefully. "Some hospital award." Dad turned on her. "Anyone can fake something online." I removed my gloves and reached for the chart tablet. My wedding ring caught the fluorescent light. Mom's gaze locked on it. Her face changed. "You're married," she breathed. I didn't answer. I gave the update because Marcus was still my patient, and that was the only reason I was standing there. He'll remain intubated overnight. There were complications, but the repair held. The administrator looked from Dad to me. "Dr. Hale, would you like security present due to the prior harassment concerns?" Dad froze. Mom turned slowly. "Harassment." I looked at Marcus's wife, Clea, sitting near the corner with her purse clutched in both hands. Her face had gone pale. "For 6 years," I said. "Every time I tried to reach you, Marcus answered first." Clea's mouth parted. Mom gripped the back of a chair. "What does that mean?" Clea spoke before I could. "Marcus always picked up the mail from your house," she said. "He said Brina was dangerous, unstable, that if anything came from her we shouldn't let you see it." Dad shook his head. No, prove it." I looked around the hallway, at the nurses listening without pretending, at the relatives who had believed I disappeared because I was guilty. "The proof isn't in the hallway," I said. Clea's hand trembled as she opened her purse. She pulled out an old phone with a cracked black case. "He kept this charged in the car," she said. "I thought it was for work." She pressed the side button. The screen lit up. Then Clea looked at me like she had just found a body buried under her marriage. "The lock screen has your name on it, Brina." The administrator moved us into a private conference room before the waiting area turned into a trial. Mom sat with both hands pressed flat on the table. Dad stayed standing, arms crossed, still trying to look angry instead of afraid. Clea placed Marcus's old phone in the center of the table like it might start speaking on its own. Marcus was unconscious in ICU. For the first time, he could not explain for everyone else. The lock screen showed my name attached to an email preview. Brina Hale Med. I stared at it. That's not my account. The administrator raised a hand. Before anyone opens anything, be careful. If this becomes legal, access matters. Claire swallowed. I'm his wife, I know the passcode. He used the same one for everything. She typed it in. The phone opened. No one breathed. There were drafts saved under my name, apologies I had never written, messages saying things like, I'm sorry for what I did at school and please don't make this public. There were forwarded emails from Dad asking why I would not answer him. There were screenshots of my real residency graduation announcement, saved and never sent. Mom touched the screen with 2 fingers. He saw this. Yes, I said, he knew. Dad's voice cracked around the edges. Open the school folder. Claire tapped a deleted folder labeled Med School. Inside was a scanned letter on university-style letterhead. My stomach tightened before I even read the first line. Expelled for falsifying patient records. I looked closer. Wrong dean, I said. Dad blinked. What? That dean retired before I started. That student ID format is wrong, and this disciplinary committee didn't exist at my school. Mom made a small sound, like air leaving a punctured lung. The accusation that had locked me out of my own family had spelling errors. Dad grabbed the back of a chair. Marcus showed me that letter 3 days before I changed the locks. Claire kept scrolling. Her thumb stopped on another folder. Tuition transfer. Her face hardened. She pulled out her own phone. I'm calling his accountant. Dad snapped, no, we need to wake Marcus up. A nurse at the door said, he cannot be disturbed. Claire put the call on speaker. It rang twice. Then a man answered, cautious and tired. Claire. She looked at the folder on Marcus's phone. I need to ask about the Hale education account. Silence. Then the accountant sighed. I wondered when someone would ask about that. The administrator reached over and closed the conference room door. Dad whispered, what education account? The accountant did not speak quickly. That made it worse. There was an account, he said through Claire's phone, set aside for Brina's remaining medical school expenses, tuition, board exams, residency interviews, moving costs. Daniel and Evelyn funded it. Marcus had access after Daniel's health scare because he was helping with online payments. Dad's hand slid off the back of the chair. Mom looked at him. Daniel. He didn't answer her. He was staring at the phone. The accountant continued. 6 years ago, most of that money was transferred into Marcus's medical supply company over 8 weeks. I questioned it. Marcus told me Brina had lost eligibility because she'd been expelled. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the hospital lights. I looked at Dad. Not with anger. Not yet. Just waiting. He lowered himself into the chair like his legs had stopped taking orders. Claire's face had gone still. How much? The accountant gave the number. Mom covered her mouth with both hands. Dad whispered, he told us she threw everything away. No, I said, he needed you to believe I had. The phone on the table now held the shape of the whole lie. Marcus hadn't made one cruel comment or passed along a rumor. He had built a system and kept feeding it for 6 years. He forged the expulsion letter. He created an email account under my name. He sent apologies I never wrote, making me sound ashamed and evasive. When I called, he intercepted first. When Dad emailed, Marcus answered or deleted the reply. When Mom's phone still had my number, he blocked me and told her I was unstable. When I mailed invitations to my wedding, they came back marked undeliverable. When my residency graduation announcement was published, he saved the screenshot and buried it on a phone he kept hidden in his car. Mom slid from the chair to the floor without a sound. Claire moved to help her, then stopped halfway, as if she no longer knew which broken person in the room belonged to her. Dad reached for the forged letter printout the administrator had placed on the table. His fingers hovered over it, shaking, but he could not pick it up. 6 years ago, through a locked door, he had told me doctors needed integrity. Now my hospital badge sat inches from the fake letter, and he could not look at both at once. I changed the locks, he said, voice hollow. I told you not to come back. Yes, I said. Mom looked up from the floor, tears running down her wrists. Brina, I heard you crying outside. I know. I wanted to open it. But you didn't. She folded over herself. Claire slowly removed her wedding ring and placed it beside the phone. There was no dramatic speech. Just the quiet sound of metal touching wood. The next day, Marcus woke in ICU with tubes in his arms and his family around his bed. But it was not the family he remembered controlling. Dad stood at the foot of the bed, not near his shoulder. Mom stayed beside the wall, arms wrapped around herself. Claire stood closest, the phone in her hand. Marcus blinked, saw me, then saw all of them. His eyes sharpened. Claire asked, was any of it true? Marcus's mouth moved dryly. Brina abandoned you first. Claire pressed play. The accountant's voice filled the room. Marcus closed his eyes. That was the confession. Not words, not apology, just the look of a man whose last hiding place had been opened. After that, everything moved without him. Dad filed a police report for theft and forgery. The university sent official records confirming I had never been expelled, never faced a disciplinary hearing, and graduated in good standing. Mom wrote to every relative who had been told I was dangerous, unstable, or disgraced. She did not soften it. She named Marcus. Claire began separation proceedings before Marcus left the hospital. His investors pulled out when the company records showed family education money had been mixed into the business. The business collapsed before the month ended. Marcus survived the surgery, but he lost the version of himself everyone had protected. As for my parents, they asked for dinner with me and my husband. Dad could barely say the word husband. They had missed my residency graduation. They had missed my wedding. They had missed 6 birthdays, 6 Christmases, and every ordinary day where they could have chosen to ask one question instead of trusting the son who made betrayal convenient. I agreed to meet them once. Not at my house. Not as a reunion. At a quiet restaurant where I could leave whenever I wanted. Dad apologized with his hands folded so tightly his knuckles went white. Mom brought a box of returned mail she had found hidden in Marcus's office. My wedding invitation was on top, still sealed. I don't know how to fix this, she said. You don't fix 6 years in one dinner, I told her. You rebuild by living differently after the truth. Weeks later, I was back in the operating room, steady under the lights, my name on the board where it belonged. At home, I framed my residency photo beside my wedding picture, not for my parents to finally see what they missed. For me. Because I was done hiding the life I built without them. Marcus survived because I was exactly who he told everyone I was.